Homies. Thanks for listening. I'm Jenny. I'm a life coach, and today I'm talking about love. Yikes. Love as far as the struggles that INFJs and other empaths go through in terms of relationships. So, first of all, if you're watching this, if you consume a lot of um, self-help content, if you read all the relationship books, if you're always trying to figure out what you're doing wrong, there's a really good chance that you're not the problem, and the only problem that you have is that you're choosing the wrong people. Okay. um we are very, very, very picky, but we somehow always very carefully select the wrong people. And I think one of the reasons for this is that we have really strong intuition, which means we're really good at judging people. What we also don't believe in judging people. So we will ignore those intuitions a lot of the times because one of our values is giving people the benefit of the doubt. But in relationships, very often this backfires. Um, so if you want to learn how to have better relationships, go find happily married people and talk to them. If you don't have that, then you're stuck with me. But in general, I think it's better to get advice from people who have been where you want to go. And I am a failure at relationships. So if you can find someone better to listen to, definitely go do that. But otherwise, I'm going to help you out the best that I can. There's a really great quote from Brene Brown, and she has defined love in her own terms. And so I want to read that quote because I think it's fantastic, and I love Brene Brown so much. And so her quote about love is: "We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get, it is something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can only survive these injuries if they are acknowledged, healed, and rare." And I love that quote so, so much. And it really is, about being fully seen, being fully known, being vulnerable, um, and trust and respect are so, so important in relationships, if not more important than love itself. Um, but one of the things I hear, so often online is the women are complaining that there's no good men, the men are complaining that there's no good women. How is this possible, right? If you have allegedly good women saying that there's no good men, and if you have allegedly good men saying that there's no good women, there's some kind of disconnect somewhere because these people either aren't finding each other, or they are and they're saying no, you're not a good catch, actually. And I think part of this is that we're in the wrong energy fields, right? If you're in a low energy field, it's like people in a higher energy field are almost invisible to you. It's almost like they're in a different dimension. And so even if you're a good person, if you're stuck in the lower energy fields, if you're negative, if you're cynical, if you're stuck in guilt and shame and blame, depression, anxiety, you're not going to even those people in those higher energy fields are not even going to fall onto your radar. Um, you can't really find people who are living in a different energy field than you. High value relationships also have a very high cost. Someone who is evolved is not going to have a lot of patience for a lot of BS. And this isn't necessarily anything against empaths. a lot of the times the empath is the unicorn in this scenario, except for the fact that they do have too much patience for BS. So when you really want to upgrade, it means you're gonna have to stop tolerating BS, but your person that you're looking for also is not gonna tolerate it. So you really just need to make sure that you've handled your BS, if you're looking for an evolved person. Um, there's an INFJ group that I was in, and one of them stated it so well. They said, being in an INFJ is like being in a constant state of unrequited love. It's complex and painful, and even more so when people tell you that it doesn't have to be that deep or hard. And I just felt like they so succinctly summarized what being an INFJ looking for love feels like. Because it's just like we love so deeply, and we want so badly to have someone to give that love to. And it's just like no one can meet us there. Um, so so I'm gonna go deep down a bunch of rabbit holes about all the problems we encounter with relationships. But stay tuned because this is just the first video in a whole series, and I've got more information coming. So try not to get too overwhelmed. There's a lot going into this episode. So one of the problems is we live in a world where we spend more time with our coworkers than we spend with our families. And when we spend more time bonding with our coworkers, affairs are bound to happen. Um, the thing about affairs is, if someone can steal your partner, they were never really worth having. It means they had really weak boundaries. It means they danced way too close to the line, and then ended up crossing it. I mean, there are exceptions, right? There are people who have overcome affairs and now have a healthy relationship, but that's the exception more than the norm. And, you know, if if someone is, having affairs with their coworkers, then um it's a choice. Like they let that happen. They had weak boundaries, right? And they didn't protect your relationship the way that they should have. Um we also, need to think about how we're balancing our masculine and feminine energy. Everyone has both masculine and feminine energy. But we tend to be overly practical with things where we need to be more creative and impractical. For example, a lot of empaths struggle with like goal setting because they're trying to do it the practical, structured way that we're told we should be doing it, and that doesn't work for us. We actually have to do things in a more creative way. Um, but with relationships, it's like the opposite. We're trying to be creative and impractical, when we could actually bring more practicality, more masculine energy to relationships and be more practical. Um, check in with our head a little bit more, and be a little bit more discerning with what our hearts are telling us, because our hearts tend to mislead us a lot when it comes to relationships. Um, we also attract people who think our kindness means romance because we are genuinely curious about people. We ask deep questions, and then people end up thinking we're romantically interested in them when we're not, because people are really desperate for deep connection. It's not really most connections in modern society are very shallow connections. And so people are kind of desperate for deep, authentic relating. But then when we give that to them, they kind of immediately latch on and start to suffocate us, and think we're a romantic interest when we're really not going for that. It's like the only thing that they know about us is that we make them feel heard. It's like they're not even seeing us as a person. They just know that we make them feel good. We make them feel seen. We make them feel heard. And that's just enough for them to latch on and start suffocating us. Um, Another problem is that no one believes in our intuition. We have very, very, very strong intuition. It's one of our number one superpowers, but most people don't believe in that. It's still taboo. It's not talked about. It's not acknowledged as a personality trait. And so that can be a very invalidating experience for us, is having a partner who doesn't believe in our intuition. Not everyone has to have intuition. Not everyone has to understand intuition, but we do need our partners to believe in our intuition. We need them to believe that we can see things that they can't, and acknowledge it and respect it. We also tend to project too far into the future when we're dating. When we're trying to decide who to date, where we're thinking about, like, oh, who's like potential husband material, instead of just picking someone we could have a fun date with, right? And you have to have those fun dates in order to fully judge, who has long-term potential. So I think we're a little bit too discerning in the beginning, but also in other ways not discerning enough, and too forgiving in other ways. Modern culture also really looks down on the friend zone, but I think the friend zone is an amazing way to actually get to know someone better, because I think you're supposed to be friends first. Being friends first is a really great way to learn who someone is when they don't have a motive, when they're not trying to get anything from you, when they're not trying to score a date, or sex or whatever. So a friend zone is a really great way to understand people when they're not just looking at it like some negative prison where you're going to keep them forever. um, a lot of people on the apps and things, it's like they're looking for just a carbon copy of them, like the masculine or feminine version of them with very focused hobbies. And that usually doesn't work for us either. We need space and we need variety. We don't really fit into a box. We're not going to fit in with the gym crowd. And we're not going to fit in with the sport crowd. We love to experience life and try new things, but we don't really fit into a box. We're not really going to be happy doing the same thing all of the time. um, Empaths and other intuitives, I think we're smart enough to know, that dating apps can be kind of toxic and lead to unrealistic expectations. But as far as the dating pool in general, I don't think they're using the apps intentionally, and it creates a culture where people are less satisfied. Having unlimited choices or perceived unlimited choices, it makes people less satisfied with their choices. And so the dating apps have kind of poisoned people's minds with this illusion of choice, because they're always thinking, well, the next flip might be someone even better, than the person I just found. As far as introverts go, sometimes we can't find our person because we never leave the house. And maybe also, if our person that we're meant for is introverted, they are also not leaving the house. So introverts are meeting less people, and INFJs, especially, are the rarest personality type. So they're the rarest personality type. The people that we're compatible with are also going to be rare. And then if you're not leaving the house, you're making it even a step harder than that. So extroverts have a lot more luck with dating just because they cross paths with more people. Um, and yeah, so it's difficult, right? It's difficult to find people that we actually like. We're also so smart. We get bored really easily. We're demisexual typically, which means it doesn't matter. We don't really care if someone is physically attractive. Like, we'll notice, we'll acknowledge that they're physically attractive, but we're not like turned on by physical attraction alone. We have to be intellectually stimulated by someone to be attracted to them. Um, we need a spiritual connection. We need an intellectual connection to actually be physically attracted to a person. Um, and it's hard to find mentally stimulating people who aren't also toxic. Toxic people are extremely mentally stimulating. Um, we need novelty, we get bored. This sometimes leads us into relationships with toxic or dysfunctional or just extreme personality types. We're also very often neurodivergent, and we are very attracted to other people who are neurodivergent. But a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with addictions, um, or have cluster B personality disorders. There's lots of ways that neurodivergence manifests, especially with men, just because um, men have less societally accepted ways of processing their emotions, which is sad. And I think that's changing, and it shouldn't be the case, but it still is, how a lot of men are raised. Men just have less healthy outlets for emotional expression. And so neurodivergent men very often struggle more with addictions, but it's not exclusive. There's plenty of women who struggle with that as well. Um, We're also so forgiving. We always see both sides of a situation. And that leads us to forgiving things we probably shouldn't. Things like abuse or addiction or cheating, because we always have sympathy for the other side. We can see, how their impulses or mistakes have come from a place of pain, and we have a lot of sympathy for that. But having sympathy for it doesn't mean we have to accept it. Um, Cheating is also energetic for us, right? Like, it's not as black and white as what you're physically doing with your body, right? Like, if you have a work crush, and you tell your partner about it, and talk about what healthy boundaries should look like, that's different than having a work crush and keeping it a secret. That is energetic cheating. Even if you haven't acted on that crush, that is energetic cheating. Um, so we can get in these arguments, where people are um, using the concrete facts, to argue or dismiss us, when everything is about energy for us. Everything is about energetics for us, and a lot of people don't understand that. Um, Relationships also bring out tons of trauma for everyone involved. If you do things in relationship that don't make logical sense, it means that you have unhealed trauma. Relationships are the most triggering thing we could possibly be in. You could be a perfectly normal, happy person, and then you get into a relationship, and suddenly it feels like you're mentally ill. So one minute somebody's doing well, they're healing, they're having a great routine, they're taking good care of themselves. Then they meet someone that they really like, and suddenly it's like every single wound is torn open. They're anxious, their abandonment wounds are coming up, they lose themselves, they engage in this push pull dance, with the other person. Um, they can't trust the other person. This is all natural. It's not fun, and it sucks. And we want to change this pattern, and we're going to work on that, but it is natural. Our childhood trauma patterns live deep within our subconscious minds, and our subconscious mind has recorded every memory we have, even those we can't consciously remember. And the role of our subconscious is to repeat these patterns in an attempt to repair or heal them. And there's a word for this. It's actually called repetition compulsion. It's why we find partners sometimes with the same traits that a parent had, that we had a conflicted relationship with. Um, and it allows us to reenact our trauma in an attempt to correct or control it. So we're all just really passing trauma around in relationships. It allows us to have a false illusion of control or safety that we lacked as children, emphasis on false. And so most relationships are an attempt to change or control something. Um, so so we're projecting into the future. We're trying too hard to control the outcome. Um, and this can also lead to trauma bonds. If you're in a relationship with a toxic person, this is where you almost get addicted to the highs and lows of your relationship. Um, I've personally experienced this. It is very much like an addiction. Okay. But the thing that I think professionals get wrong is if they see a trauma bond, um, they invalidate the love that is there. Um, they act like it's an either or. It either is love or it is trauma bonding, and that just hurts the self-worth of victims more. Victims need their self-worth to be built up, and I don't think it's an either or. I think you can love someone and be trauma bonded to them. This is a very common issue that happens between narcissistic people and people with codependent behaviors. um, and it's hard to know that you're picking someone safe, because with anyone, um, those relational wounds don't really show up until 3 months into a relationship. Until 3 months into a relationship, you really don't know who you're dating. They're going to be on their best behavior, and they're not bonded to you enough for those wounds to start showing up. Um, so so we end up in these abusive relationships, one because 3 months in is when these things start happening. We're already too invested at that point. Another reason is when you feel alone and lonely all the time. An abusive relationship actually feels better than feeling alone and lonely all the time. And it also makes the loneliness make sense. It Because, before, you're trying to make sense, why am I lonely, um and then when you're getting abused, it's like, oh, this is why I'm lonely, right? Because I'm this terrible person. It's not logical, but it is kind of what happens. It Abuse finally makes the loneliness make sense. It finally makes us feel like, oh, I deserved that feeling. For people who experienced childhood emotional neglect, which is very common with empaths, um, love bombing does not feel like a red flag. It feels like someone values, appreciates them, or gets them. Love bombing is something that toxic people do to create a bond very quickly. So this is another reason we get trauma bonded to people, is they love bomb us to create a very strong bond very quickly. And if you have an emotional neglect, this doesn't feel like a red flag. It feels like someone finally values, appreciates, and understands us. So that's when they shower you with affection. When they shower you with affection very early on in a relationship. People who love bomb others typically have attachment wounding, and they lack emotional maturity, and they lack emotional regulation skills. Um, they create emotional intimacy quickly because it gives them a sense of security and control. They don't feel safe in relationships, and so they create this very intense bond in order to feel safe. And it may seem loving, but underneath is a desire for control. It comes from a deep rooted insecurity, um, but it's toxic in an attempt to control the other person. They do this through being in constant contact with you, not giving you space, attempting to spend every moment together, learning different aspects about your wife that about your I'm sorry, your life that they weaponize later, doing everything they can for you to make you feel indebted to them. Be careful if someone like tries to take over your bills, pay your bills for you, because that's a way that they can make you indebted and dependent on them. Um, it is possible to meet someone that you have an immediate, passionate connection with, but love bombing is a little bit different. With bombing, the relationship moves way too quickly. Um, it's common for people who love bomb to want to move in together very quickly, or push for commitment or engagement very quickly without really getting to know each other. So if you get an intuition that things are moving too quickly, really trust that. Their love also comes with conditions. They might have unrealistic expectations about how you should behave, how you should react, how you should dress, what you should eat. Um, they will shower you with gifts, and then call you, ungrateful for not responding in the way that they want you to. They have high expectations around how you should reciprocate their gifts, and all of their actions come with conditions. They demand excessive attention. Um, Attachment wounding causes people who love bomb to need constant sign that their partner loves them. They struggle with separation anxiety, giving space, or understanding that you're a separate person with needs outside of the relationship. Um, they might guilt trip you a lot of the time if they're not getting what they want. They might start to be critical. These can be very subtle, passive aggressive criticisms at first. Um, and just as easily as they will love bomb you, they will then turn around and shower you with criticism. These people usually struggle to regulate their emotions. When they're upset, they can spiral. They can have kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing going on. They might even dissociate and not remember your interactions, or at least pretend to not remember. And then when you finally, start to set boundaries, they'll apologize, promise it won't happen again, but it always does, because they can't regulate their emotions. They lack impulse control. They don't understand or respect boundaries. If you set a boundary, they will just test it over and over again. Um, they see boundaries as withholding love, or treat boundaries like you're withholding love. um, and their emotional immaturity doesn't allow them to understand that people have different needs than they do. So, for example, you might tell your partner that you need a night to yourself to catch up with work and get some space, and then they show up. They kind of show up anyway with some excuse. Um, so their needs always come before their partner's needs. And it is a form of emotional abuse, but it often goes unrecognized as that. So, to protect yourself from love bombing, it's important to be happy enough. Because if you're sad and lonely all the time, an abusive relationship is going to look better than being sad and lonely all the time. But if you are happy enough, then an abusive relationship will look worse, um, worse than your alternative. So you don't have to be happy all the time. Your life doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to be happy enough, that feeling alone and lonely, um, or feeling abused, is not worth it. Okay, so you have to like your own company so much that the wrong company isn't worth it. Another problem in relationships for empaths and INFJs is we are always trying to earn love, prove our worth. We're always trying to overgive. We lose ourselves in relationships. We're always trying to meet the other person's needs, not getting our needs met. The unspoken cry in our relationships is, when are you going to love me the way I want and need? And so we have to find someone who doesn't have to change in order to be compatible, in order to give us what we want and need. Whatever you are trying to earn, you are already deserving of it. But we have a habit of picking people who can't give us what we need, and then begging for them to change and give us what we need, instead of picking people who can just automatically give it to us without changing. And I think this is because, we have so much compassion for people who have struggles and have demons. And if they overcome that to love us, it means so much more to us than someone who doesn't have to fight their demons to love us. We care about um, the pain and the struggles that people go through. And if they're going through pain and struggles to love us, it means we're worth the pain and struggle versus, someone who can just easily, freely give it. That's kind of boring. And is that healthy? No, but it does happen. Um, but you can't earn the type of love you want by abandoning your needs to meet someone else's. Um, so so whatever you accept in your relationship, you're also teaching your kids what they can accept in their relationships. Your kids are watching you. If you have kids, and you're choosing relationships where you're always overgiving, you're teaching your kids that. So just be very aware, be very selective of the people you pick. It's important, whether you have kids or not, but especially if you have kids. They're not listening to what you're saying to them, they're watching what you're doing. And that's how they're learning what to accept in their relationships. There's a great book called The Human Magnet Syndrome that talks about overgiving. And it says that at whatever capacity you're giving, you're going to attract someone with the same capacity for taking. So if you're a +5 giver, you're going to attract a -5 taker. And this is unhealthy and toxic and all of these things. Um, there's always usually a slight imbalance, but if you're at a 3 or a 2 or a 1 giving and you're attracting a -3 or a -2 or a -1 taker, that is way healthier, than being on the extreme ends of the spectrum. So that's another thing to think about. There are very few people who can meet our needs, but we also need to learn to ask for our needs to be met. And this is different than asking for another person to change who they are. So when you're asking for your needs to be met, it's important to focus on how you feel and what you need, and not what you need the other person to change about who they are. Um, so we show love by meeting other people's needs. This is something that we're very good at naturally, but it's not natural for other people. And if we're not with other empaths, they're probably not going to be as good at just intuiting what our needs are. But the measuring stick is going to be, can you ask for your needs to be met, and do they meet you there? So the responsibility on us is to ask for it, and the responsibility on them is to meet us there. And that's really how you have to measure people. You have to give them a chance to meet your needs and then decide. We also have trouble receiving. This is kind of rooted in some control issues for us. Um, we do have trouble receiving. So part of this is also just going to be allowing people to meet your needs. This feels very uncomfortable for us. It feels very uncomfortable for us to sit back and receive. But that's also going to be an important thing to practice. Empaths and INFJs are usually always playing the therapist in our relationships. It's okay to play the therapist, but you shouldn't be playing it all the time. And it's supposed to be reciprocal. Choosing a romantic partner, you're choosing a confidant, a counselor, a career advisor, a therapist, an investor, a teacher, a travel buddy, a roommate, a best friend, and a business partner. It's not only your job to be those things, it is also their job to be those things. So they should also be your therapist. Okay. But we are drawn to people with wounds, and loving someone who is hard to love is not a weakness, but it can be a problem, to be drawn to people with wounds, because in those situations we are the ones who are playing the therapist all of the time, because we're healers, and we're just looking for outlets for somewhere for this healing energy to go. And if we don't have appropriate outlets for that, it's usually going to be directed onto our partner. But this causes problems in our relationships where we try to rescue or fix people. You cannot try to heal and fix your partner, because it creates an unfair power dynamic. um we can't see everyone's bullshit. So it's very hard to step back and not try to fix things. But compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. And healing your partner creates a power dynamic where they feel psychoanalyzed, they feel diagnosed, um, and and um, it doesn't make them feel like an equal. You're also going to be too invested in the outcome. Healing comes from a place of neutrality and detachment, where the full weight of the outcome is placed squarely on the wounded person's shoulders. You have to empower them by surrendering them to fate and their own will. And if you're in a relationship with someone, it is almost impossible to surrender them to fate and their own will because everything that happens to them affects you. Um, so we're here to do important work. And in relationships, we struggle to put our needs first. But if our relationship is taking all of our energy, we can't do that important work that we are here to do. So we have to stop picking people based on potential because it could take multiple lifetimes for someone to reach their potential. They might never reach their potential in this lifetime, no matter how hard you try to help them. So good partners, the people that we want to attract, aren't going to date partners who tolerate less. So we cannot tolerate less if we're looking for good partners. And choosing people who need us to fix them is us tolerating less. So um, you really have to be kind of ruthless with this. It's okay to love someone from a distance. It's okay to help someone, but try not to muddy that with people you're dating and people you're in relationships with. We see past the surface and we are future oriented. We see people's potential and it is so hard to let go of that. But we have to stop future tripping where we get stuck in relationships based on what they could be instead of what they are right now. We have to stop using our relationships as a way to meet our needs for finding meaning and purpose in our lives. When you have a relationship that's easy, you can do other things that are hard. If you stop seeking challenge in your relationships, it frees you up to seek challenge elsewhere. So, really pay attention to whether your partner makes it easier or harder for you to share your gifts. Yes, relationships will be hard sometimes. Yes, your relationship will drain you sometimes. But overall, your relationship should make it easier instead of harder for you to share your gifts. It is our essence. It is a core trait of our essence to be challenged, to challenge ourselves, and to learn lessons and to feel alive. But if we're picking challenging relationships, we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to seek challenge elsewhere, to be bold, to create, to stand up and speak our minds, to adventure, and to take risks with high rewards. So pick consciously where you're getting your challenges from. Dating is unpredictable and it is way outside of our comfort zones. And it's hard for us to feel prepared and comfortable when we have to interact with strangers. And the more anxious we are, the harder it's going to be for us to hear our intuition. And we are very slow processors. So it's really important to go slow, take your time to really think about things, have a conversation, then take your time to think about how that conversation went. Go on a date and then really take your time to think about how that date went. Build in as much space as you can to process because it takes us a long time to figure out how we feel. We might not realize someone violated a boundary right away or said something kind of sketchy right away or articulate an exact problem or a vibe that was off right away. And it's important for us to listen to those things. If you're an introvert, you don't have a lot of opportunities to meet new people because you spend a lot of time alone. And when you finally do socialize, it's hard to find people you connect with. You want to find someone who deeply knows us, and we also don't want to let them in. So, so for introverts especially, you're going to have to really push yourself to meet people. Okay, you can use apps for that. You have to be really intentional if you're going to do that. Or you can go out in public and try to meet people that way. It's just automatically going to be more challenging for introverts because we want people to deeply see and know us, and we also don't want to let them in. This could go for extroverts too. We're also chameleons. We've spent our whole lives trying to blend in. Um, but that's not a good way to find your person either. To meet your person, you have to be fully yourself. You have to be like waving your flag, right, for everyone to see. And that's hard for us because we've been hiding our identities for so long. So you really have to be unapologetically yourself in order for the other person to see you, recognize that you're someone that they're interested in. We can be too idealistic. Idealistic people can't find idealistic partners because they don't exist. A perfect person does not exist. But we find people with the potential to be ideal, but who never reach that potential. And then we spend years begging for change when we could have been happy with someone who is perfectly imperfect. So we have to focus on what choices are actually available to us now, in the present moment, not in the future. Thinking another human can complete you is giving other humans way too much credit, but this is difficult and confusing. Figuring out where the line is between, are you being realistic or are you settling, right? And this is just a very delicate balance because they feel very similar to us. Am I settling for someone I don't really want, or am I being realistic and accepting that no one is going to be perfect? These are important questions to ask yourself, reflect on, journal on, really, really think deeply about. Disney and porn have also created really unrealistic expectations. I don't think this is as a big of a problem for deep thinkers as it is for the general population, but Disney and porn have also created unrealistic expectations in relationships. And trust is hard for us. Relationships are terrifying for people with complex trauma because it's like handing someone else a knife and trusting them not to stab you with it when everyone else has stabbed you. So it's difficult to open up and be vulnerable and share our real selves because it's giving the other person an opportunity to stab you, basically. So, how do you know who to trust? Focus on their actions instead of their words. How you feel matters is enough of a reason, right? If someone is distant for 4 days, you have no idea if they're seeing someone else on the side, or if they're just self-involved and not thinking about you, or absent-minded. But how you feel matters. No matter what they're doing, you don't feel important. No matter what they're doing, you don't feel like a priority. And how someone makes you feel is enough of a reason. We're always trying to reason away our feelings, but the way someone makes us feel matters enough by itself. We need a lot of communication and information to feel secure. Some people will feel like we're being controlling if we just need information to feel secure. We're constantly trying to predict the future. We need information to do that. People who are aloof or distant or confusing or don't communicate clearly are going to trigger a lot of anxiety for us. We're going to start trying to fill in the blanks. Um, Whereas if they could just communicate, everyone would be happier, right? Then you would be able to give them the freedom that they're wanting. Um, so when people don't give us information, it feels like they're withholding security from us, and that is very triggering. So you can trust people who care about your feelings, but who are also willing to hurt your feelings, right? Like if they were to cheat on you and they tell you about it, right? They care about your feelings, but they're also willing to hurt you for the sake of telling you the truth. So you can trust people who show that they care about your feelings, but are also willing to hurt you in order to be authentic and to tell the truth. Um, Inconsistent people, if you're neurodivergent, inconsistent people trigger dopamine hits and hyperfixation for us. Inconsistent people create addictive um, triggers for us. Um, it's like you're always going to be chasing that next high, that next hit of attention, that next hit of validation, or that feeling of love. So if you're neurodivergent, you've got to be really, really careful with inconsistent people because they can be very addictive. Um, so remember, it's the nature of our intimate relationships to trigger core wounds. But what matters is if you have a partner who knows that and who helps you work through that, or if they just get defensive and shut down, or abandon you, or fight with you, or mistreat you when those core wounds get triggered. This is an opportunity to help your partner heal something if it can be seen that way. Um, when a core wound gets triggered, there's going to be more emotion than the situation warrants, sudden and intense emotions. You'll, have trouble letting things go. Common core wounds that get triggered are abandonment, rejection, self-worth, self-image, victimization. Um, if you have a suffocation wound, you had probably an overbearing, controlling, or micromanaging parent, and you view your partner as too needy or too weak. If you have an explosion wound, it means you're used to conflicts growing up causing explosions. This can lead to an avoidant partner, or a partner who feels abandoned and rejected. Partners who feel abandoned and rejected. Anxiety, if you have anxiety, it means growing up, probably no one knew how to manage their emotions, and a conflict caused shame and fear and guilt spirals. This leads to a need to fix and to smother your partner. Um, if neglect was a wound for you, it can cause you to be emotionally unavailable, and your partner will be triggered when you're not giving them enough attention. If you're a lone wolf, you probably never witnessed teamwork. You don't understand your partner's needs or wants, and you don't like to compromise. Or if you were a golden child, you need praise and to be seen as perfect. If you seek critical partners, it means you probably didn't receive acceptance growing up. And you become subconsciously attracted to partners who are critical or who attempt to change you or make you work for approval. And this won't be a red flag because in your subconscious mind, you had to work to earn love and approval and acceptance. If you seek emotionally unavailable partners, your parents probably seemed neutral or unconcerned or dismissive of you and never got to know you as a unique human being. The result is that you didn't get to feel known, and you're most comfortable with partners who give you emotional breadcrumbs. You're used to not being seen and heard, and so you subconsciously seek partners who are uninterested in your emotional experiences and who tend to be self-absorbed. A little bit more to go, guys. If you're seeking partners who are fixer uppers or projects, your parents were probably irresponsible in a way that negatively impacted you as a child, like they were bad with money or couldn't keep a job or use substances or they were unreliable. And the result is that you didn't receive reliability and you become attracted to people who need fixing or enabling, or who we can become a parent to. And this is a familiar childhood role where we feel powerful and in control by fixing people. Um, but if you're doing that, what happens is you're basically just getting them ready for the next person. We put all this energy into fixing someone, and then once they're fixed, then they abandon us and they move on to someone else who gets the better version of them. So be very, very careful about fixing people. If you seek partners who are dominating, your parents might have been harsh disciplinarians who believed in authoritarian parenting where children had no power. The result is you didn't receive autonomy or agency, and you become attracted to dominating, call the shots partners who don't ask for your input and make decisions for you. You never got to make your own choices, so you're most comfortable with partners who just choose for you and you just go along with it. If you seek partners who consistently betray you, your parents might have betrayed each other regularly or had marital affairs, and we witnessed this. Them model, how they treated their relationships. And the result is that we didn't receive transparency or honesty, and we become subconsciously attracted to people who are not transparent or who hide things or who live double lives. Um, when these partners betray us, we don't see this as a cue to leave. Instead, we feel like we have to convince the person to stay with us. We might try to get them to change or make promises not to do it again. Even when the behavior continues, we will stay in the relationship because subconsciously we learned that love means betrayal. And self sabotage, fear of abandonment, getting abandoned on purpose. Um, Fear of abandonment paradoxically can cause us to be abandoned. Um, so so if you have, parents who abandoned your emotional needs, physical needs, any kind of needs, this fear of abandonment can make you very anxious or controlling or emotional and have big irrational unhealthy reactions which then push the person away. So self-sabotage, fear of abandonment is often a self-fulfilling prophecy. um, and another thing I want to say is, even if your parents didn't have any of these patterns, sometimes even if your grandparents had these patterns, it can manifest in your relationships as well. Epigenetics, generational trauma, those things are passed down in your genes. So, if even if your parents didn't have affairs, if your grandparents had affairs, that signature can still be in your genes and manifesting, which is great. Great for us trauma generational cycle breakers. um, so, the question is, when these things come up, can you both see it as trauma and can you work through it together, or can you not? There's a lot of importance in awareness and in recognizing what is just a story that you're telling yourself versus what is the actual reality, right? So focus on the facts and not the story that you're telling yourself about the facts. Your feelings do matter, but you need to recognize that they are feelings and that they might be coming from a story that you're telling yourself. Not always. And again, how your partner makes you feel matters, but it's also important to be conscious of whether those feelings are coming from a story that you're telling yourself or not. Be very intentional about how you discuss things with your partner. Use statements are usually triggering and going to make the other person defensive, like, you did this, or assigning intent, right? Like, you neglected me is assigning intent versus um, saying, when you did this, I felt this way. Like, when I didn't hear from you, I felt neglected, right? It takes the defensiveness away, the accusations away from the other person. You're not assigning intent. You're not saying, you tried to make me feel neglected. You neglected me. When I didn't hear from you for days, I felt neglected, right? Completely different dynamic. And love is like a plant, right? If it's dying, it can be revived, but once it's dead, it can't. And many people don't try reviving the plant until it's already dead. Um, Empaths usually wait until the plant is dead to leave. We are overly loyal and we stay in relationships too long, and we wait until the plant is dead to leave. And then, of course, the other person suddenly is trying to water the plant and it's too late. So if you want the other person to have a chance at reviving the plant, sometimes you actually need to give up sooner, check out sooner, give them some space to work on themselves, and come back and try again. A lot of the times they will try to get you back before they've done any of the work. So you do have to be careful about that. And, you know, it's pretty common for there to be like one anxious person in a relationship, one dismissive person in a relationship. Once the anxious person finally gives up and they stop fighting for the relationship, suddenly the dismissive person thinks everything is fine now because you stopped complaining, when really it's dead because you stopped caring enough to complain. So that's, the plant's dead, and they think everything's fine. So it's important to just give up and detach sooner before the plant dies. If you don't want to door slam them and kick them out of your life completely, say no to the wrong ones sooner. Um, we keep over investing in the wrong ones. I think because it is so rare for us to find someone that we actually do like. So when we do finally find someone we actually do like, we over invest in them because it's so rare. But we still need to say no to the wrong ones sooner, even if we like them. And if you're doing the right things with the wrong person, none of this is going to work. You can do everything right with the wrong person, and it's still not going to work, right? Because you can do everything in your power to fix a broken relationship, and you're still only capable of fixing half. So, you're only responsible for 50% of the problem. There's only so much you can do. And if you're doing everything right with the wrong person, you're still only fixing 50% of the problem. So, for your homework, I want you to make a list of all the things that you did and did not like about your past partners. Look at the toxic traits that your past partners had, and then think about what were the early warning signs that you ignored. Um, this is to help prove to yourself that you do have good intuition, that you can trust, because I'm sure that you did see warning signs that you chose not to act on. So this is proof. This is a confidence building activity, okay? This isn't a reason to shame or blame yourself. This is to prove to yourself that you do have strong intuition and that it does work. You just didn't listen to it. And so moving forward, hopefully you will be able to trust it and listen to it more. That's everything I have for today, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in coaching or more content, check out the links in the description. Thanks so much.